Hey folks, you're listening to the Idea Roastery. I'm Herman.
And I'm Jason.
So Jason, when you build a greenfield software project starting from scratch, how do you reason about getting the first building blocks in place? Like, how do you start a project?
I first of all start by buying a domain.
Okay, naturally.
Yeah, because I think like the idea, like the end goal is kind of like what I strive for.
So it's like the commitment, like I have the domain now.
Okay, yeah, this is gonna be cool. No, I'm joking, but I think I've taken different approaches in the past. I think a lot of my thinking is around the lean way of building things, and that is trying to build the smallest sort of working version first, and then to add complexity onto it over time. And what that usually for me entails is starting from the visual part, so like what it looks like, how it operates, and then kind of working backwards from there. So for instance, and more recently it's been a lot easier with using AI tools, but basically I can like have them mock up the front end and then start to add in like APIs and layers like that. But then I've not really done a lot of really complicated stuff. So I don't know if it works for all cases. What's your take?
Well, I think you're right on the nose over there, and I think that all complex software starts off by being simple software, right? Is that you don't immediately create a huge spec document where you line out all the requirements, because at the end of the day, the actual process of building is going to better define the requirements than you could ever speculate in the beginning. And so I'm actually very similar to you in that respect, and I will tend to reason about what the smallest bit of functionality should be that satisfies the result that I'm looking for, and then implement that and then grow it outwards, right? But I like to also start with a bit of a visual one. I'll actually do this on pure pen and paper, sketch out what the screen like, what that screen will look like, and then just reason about how one transitions through the different bits and pieces and ultimately, hopefully, achieves some or other goal. And then when that minimum functionality is in place, preferably get that in front of real people, and then expand it out thereafter. And so I think that that's actually a pretty good framework for building a lot of things, especially in software where you can kind of build things outwards, and also in things like organizations. If you're a freelancer, you don't start planning out, and you want to run an agency, you don't start planning out like the corporate structure. What you do is you start expanding your personal network, and you bring on a couple of extra clients. You hire your first employee to do the parts of the work that you think that someone else would be more suitable, and then you buy the person to handle the inbound, and then you expand your client network. And then once you get to, let's say for instance, 5 people, then you can start thinking about, okay, we want a sort of management tier or a manager. And as you get past 10 people, you've got a management tier, and etc. etc. It's this organic system. And I like this idea that intangible things like organizations and stuff are more akin to plants than they are to architecture, right? Is that you're not planning out the exact details of it. You're instead figuring out where it can grow to and how it can grow.
Yeah, and a lot of the ideas there, I think, kind of stem from like Japanese manufacturing culture, because I think a lot of software developers have read some of these books, like the DevOps Handbook and like Phoenix Project and stuff like that. And a lot of it is this like Kaizen of like you build something only when it's like really needed. And so I guess, especially with pre-AI software, the thing you had to do is make sure that you understood a process really well before you wrote the software for it.
Because writing software was really expensive.
It was really expensive, and also the amount of tech debt that gets added when you just don't think too hard about a problem, or you're just throwing like software into your code code base, can actually come back and bite you, because you end up with like 3 customers using a really minute feature, and then you try and implement a new feature, and then you have to like kind of get these other customers to move over. So like only making sure that you're building stuff as it's like really, really like a pain point, that also leads to software that's kind of both minimal but also like useful.
I also think one of the great evils in the world is premature optimization, where you're like, I'm going to write this in high-performant Rust and have it run, on the edge so that I can serve my one paying customer at sub-millisecond speed. And it's like, yeah, there are other more important things to focus on right now. And once you have enough customers for this to be a bottleneck, well, that's a very good problem to have. And point.
Do you think the I guess MVP build-up approach works for larger, sort of like more like hardware, deep tech kind of problems? Because I think where it starts to maybe break down a little bit is where you do have a lot of interconnecting players that need to work together. I mean, I've never built like a chip fab or like a manufacturer that is a certain aspect where you might not even see the first results until like a couple of weeks down the line, or a couple of months even. I can't imagine it like, I wonder if it has the same approach. Do you think it breaks down at any point?
I'm sure it does. I think that this is a very particular way of building, and it lends itself more closely to sort of greenfield software projects than it does to, say, a chip fab, or, as I said earlier, like designing a building. Is that I'm sure you've seen the age-old lean illustrations of like, okay, you start off with a skateboard, then you upgrade it to a scooter, you upgrade it to a moped, and then a car, whatever. And so that works very well with greenfield software projects, because you're also learning about the requirements and about the goals that you're trying to achieve with that project. Whereas with, let's say, for instance, you're building an apartment building, is you have to know exactly what it is. You have to make sure that before the first brick is laid, that you've got water lines going into the space that you've dug the foundation, that electricity is going to be hooked up in whatever way. And you have to take into account things like geological safety. Are there earthquakes in the area? And then you can start actually building out. So in cases like that, the lean method is, I don't want to say useless, but it's not the way that you would design and build something like that. And the same could be said about chip fabs, which are arguably the most complex pieces of machinery built by man, right? And so I don't think you're going to like organically grow a chip fab. No.
I think it's more like the traditional. There was like project management, I think. So I did a couple of project management courses before, and it was like, yeah, you have like these series of steps, and they make them into like, there's a project manager's book of knowledge or something, where it's like stakeholder management, like alignment, like taking the idea and deconstructing it into subtasks and finding owners for those subtasks. And there's like I guess that's the whole science of project management, like building a bridge. That's where you start to get into this kind of like, I guess, methodization of how to build stuff, where it's kind of like a blueprint, but it's still, there's still like variations in it, because you can have a building that looks different, but you still have like the foundations need to be poured.
And I think that if we take a look at the origin of lean manufacturing, it's actually car manufacturing by the Japanese, where you've got this just-in-time manufacturing, and you have a process set up that does things sort of one at a time, so that each bit of the process can be validated, can be sort of moved on as time goes on. And I think that that's a incredibly robust way to do things. It also means that you don't have to have huge amounts of storage space for all the half components. But more, it just allows you to refine each part of the process as it's happening more robustly. And that's why it applied so well to software. You could argue that aspects of this lean manufacturing methodology could apply to, building a building, but more in the process of it, not necessarily in the design of it. Like hopefully when you're putting up an apartment building, you're not going to have to do too much learning along the way. Hopefully you know exactly what you're doing, because people are going to be living in this structure for, at least the next 50 years.
Yeah. What about like projects where you don't know the outcome? Because I did this accelerator last year, and a lot of the startups were looking to do projects within science where there's no outcome. It's like, we think that there's a way to turn this molecule into a new molecule, and that's going to be able to absorb more CO2 or something, or there's an unknown outcome. How do you think about those kind of problems? I mean, if you were to be given a task of like, hey, like create a molecule that can extract carbon dioxide, like how would you think about something like that?
Whoa, I haven't spent
Would you
enough
take it
time
on
in
first
doing.
of all?
I haven't done enough. I haven't spent enough time doing deep research and material sciences.
But say you're not the scientist. You're just like the business guy with the idea, and your idea is like, maybe I want to extract carbon dioxide and turn it into a fuel or something like. Or I want to do eradicate poverty or something like something that's like bold, ambitious. How would you like think about it?
I'd certainly do it in that way where, this would by definition be a greenfield project that requires a lot of learning. And so it built into the very fabric of it would have to be this process of validating assumption, right? Is that you are unlikely to say, here is a problem, and know exactly what the solution is, and also understand all of the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns off the bat, put together a big blueprint and go and execute on it. That is incredibly unlikely to happen unless you are, the smartest person in the universe. Instead, you'd have to figure out what the least expensive way is for you to verify that your assumptions are correct. And once you verified certain assumptions are correct, then grow out that portion of the project while you verify other assumptions as well. And actually, the example that you used over there is something that Terraform Industries, which is run by, I think, an SpaceX dude called Casey Hanmer, where his idea is to use direct air carbon capture and then take that carbon dioxide and convert it into a more usable form of carbon, whether it be methane, natural gas, or even go so far as to refine that further into something like jet fuel or potentially plastic. You can take carbon dioxide, mix it with hydrogen from, say, cracking water, and if you've got enough energy to do that, then you can create complex hydrocarbons. And so his entire company, Terraform Industries, is based around that premise, where they're betting on solar energy becoming so cheap, and they actually say that it is currently at cost parity, where they can do this to potentially replace actual natural gas and carbon neutral methane instead. Now, in order for them to verify this, they can't just say like, okay, we're going to build this plant and this is going to solve the problem. Instead, they start out by doing a bunch of little tests in the lab to verify their assumptions. They have to speculate on whether this scales up well and whether the energy output of solar panels will actually be able to do this process, because maybe it works on paper in a perfect physics world, but if you don't take into account, conversion costs and losses, et cetera, et cetera. So then you go and you build out a small test plant to verify your assumptions, and this will probably not be a net positive producer of power because it's on a small scale, but then you can extrapolate that if you scale it up, then it will in fact work. And we sort of see this same process going on with nuclear fusion, in that we at some point speculate that, hey, we'll probably get to this abundant form of energy at some point, but we have to build all these small scale models first to verify that we can actually get to net positive energy.
I find those ones the wildest, because I think they've just they've just broken ground in the US on the I can't remember. There's one energy fusion company that Trump like invested in, and they've just broken ground. But it's kind of like they haven't even verified the model yet. And I think also there's a tokamak in France or something in Europe,
ITER.
which is where they've been building it for years.
Well, so it's also a research one, right? It's like it's not
true.
really meant to be a net generator. It's more for us to create a big old place where we can squeeze some molecules together and see if we can create energy, and then from there take those learnings and refine them further into hopefully creating a way to do it in the future where it creates more energy out than.
Yeah, I think it very much also follows the like kind of scientific method in a way. It's like coming up with a hypothesis and then like figuring out whether it's like is valid or not. One thing I wonder if you ever dabble with is I think coming from South Africa, and also because you're also in a bootstrapper kind of business, right? Do you ever find yourself thinking too small? Because one of the things I think about is like bootstrapping things, validating things, taking your time. Like if you were confronted with like, oh, we have to solve this problem, like there's like a meteor coming towards us from outer space and it's going to hit us in like 5 years. We don't necessarily have the time to like go through that method really fast. Or how would you think about it? Or do you think that you ever think too small? Because I think I have this mindset of like validate first, but then at my previous work, they were like, yeah, you need to think bigger. You need to think like what this could become.
Yeah.
Try and sell that vision. And I think it's maybe from scarcity. There's like a scarcity element of like when you come from scarcity, you haven't had a lot of cash. You tend to be conservative. Do you ever find that with your stuff? Do you ever think you're thinking too small?
I'm absolutely thinking small. I'm thinking very locally. I'm thinking about the people around me and the projects that I work on, and how like I'm none of the stuff that I'm working on is going to change the world, right? And I've kind of accepted that. Now, the whole thinking incredibly big it's a superpower, but or a super villain power. It works both ways. Is that at the during the Second World War, we went really, really hard into figuring out nuclear energy, right? And that is, really big brained. Also the space race, really, really big brained. This wasn't like a small validated assumptions. Of course, on the actual testing these some assumptions and building them out, it still follows the same, verify, improve approach. But it was a very ambitious project, and a lot of shortcuts were taken. I mean, there are concrete historical examples that have been declassified about the Manhattan Project, where during certain nuclear tests, we weren't sure if we were going to light the atmosphere on fire, and if like we would have just, a 1% chance of us lighting the atmosphere on fire is too high a risk when it's like all of humanity dies, right? But we took those risks.
I think we're still taking them because I think didn't Sam Altman say there's like 1% chance that the AI is going to just like take over everything?
Yeah, no, straight up, and so that's kind of what I'm pointing at over here is that in this case it was a governmentally backed project, but you also have these large corporations which have hundreds of billions of dollars at their disposal, which is arguably the same amount of funding that the Manhattan Project had, right? And they can take these big, wild swings at the fence. I mean, you previously, when you said where I previously worked, you were working at one of these big companies that has a lot of capital behind them. That they do, in fact, want to take these big swings at the fence because, like, you as an individual contributor, in your role as, in your software role, if you're not taking very big swings at the fence, like, yeah, you're going to do your job and you're going to be an important part of the machine, but also inherently replaceable. Whereas if you swung at the fence and you took these large risks and they didn't pay off, okay, well, you'd be fired. But if they did pay off, you could be the, Andrei Karpathy of of the world. And so it's definitely something to think about. But I think in my personal context, right, it's like I'm kind of in the process of building security for myself and the people around me, and for the projects that I'm working on. And I think once you have that personal security, that's sort of when people decide to start doing these big things. I mean, like, every one of the big billionaires who are over 50, they've all started investing large amounts of money in space flight, longevity research, these things that require a lot of investment, both in time and money. And they're doing that because they have the resources to do it. Whereas, if you are just working a regular job, it is you're unlikely to make a hell of a lot of progress on those.
But then I guess it's like it comes down to, I mean, not necessarily. It's more like discounting the upside, and I guess this is where things like risk tolerance comes in. Is like, yeah, you're working towards security, which I assume is like kind of like a fire or like retirement kind of security. Is that right? So then it's like, could you just take what you have, build another business that's maybe going to grow faster and get you there quicker, right? So and that's where I think there's maybe a middle ground where people need to, you can't. I mean, if you're in the middle of Africa, there's a very like low chance that you're going to be able to build like a Facebook style business. It's not impossible, but it's going to be difficult. But to kind of pick a target that's maybe a little bit outside the boundary of what you think is possible does both, I think, allow you to grow, but also to get you into that mindset of thinking about some of these, like, how would I, tackle this problem? Because I think thinking too small, you also kind of limit yourself as to like, okay, like, will I get this working?
And I think that you're certainly right on something. Is that in order to I think thrive, is you need to have a certain amount of risk tolerance. But I think the correct amount of risk tolerance to have is the correct amount based on your right. So let's take, for instance, Zuckerberg or Bill Gates. Is they both, if they failed at what it is they were trying to do with Microsoft and Facebook respective, is they would have been able to fall back on their wealthy family and still go to Ivy League universities and everything gravy, right? Whereas, I don't have a wealthy family and have an inheritance to look forward to or anything like that. And so if I were to take all of my savings and all of my revenue from my existing business, pile that into another venture, that would actually be the risk on that front. It's relative to my contact, right? And so it would be a bit of a silly one, especially considering, if you take a look at how venture capitalists work, is they aren't expecting every invested to do well. They're actually expecting 90 to 95% to do so badly that they disappear, right? They're hoping for that 5 to 10% of them to make outsized returns that more than makes up for the losses that they made and all. And so while I do have a lot of faith in myself and my ability to execute, I also know that there's a lot of things outside of my control. And so let's say, for instance, I have, and this is going to sound very, self-aggrandizing, but let's say I have a better than average shot of creating another successful business. Well, that might raise my chance of creating successful business from 10% to 15, 20%. That's still not a very good bet to make, right? Now, and I'm talking about these moonshot ideas. I think you have a significantly better chance of creating a smaller lifestyle business that funds your life. Maybe it even makes like slightly outsized returns. But if you're talking about the big ones that like venture capitalists want to invest in, you've got a 1 in 10 chance if you have a big amount of backing, which I think is the sort of the main way that happens.
I think it's like, I think there's as we know, there's like room for both sides, and I think it's one of the big things about these like big projects like NASA and like big government projects is that the idea is that there is stuff that trickles out of that process, like going to space brought people like GPS and all these like really like useful technologies. And so I think people tend to discount, people are always like, oh, why do we need to go to Mars? Like, there's no reason to go to Mars. Why don't we just make Earth like better? It's like, there is technology that comes out of it. And I think we've talked about it like maybe a couple of years ago, actually, like the trickle down of like education to, get people who are working on this like scientific stuff. I think there is value to that. And it's also, I think the VC side, there is a benefit to it in terms of like step changes, right? Mm-hmm. Like you can have incremental changes, but you can also, if you want to get like, Africa to become like a modern, like first world country, that's going to require like a step change.
It can't just be like business as usual.
Yeah, I mean, it can happen over time, but if the rest of the world is also growing at the same rate, it's like, you're going to just, it's never going to catch up. Like that's how exponentials work, right? But in order to get these like step changes in the status quo, I think you do need to have these big swings. And yeah, it's more of a risk tolerance. And I do agree that having this like sort of social safety net of either like parents or you've made your nut, as I've heard them say, is definitely a factor.
This brings me to something that confused and maybe so there's we know that having a bit of a safety net is really good for innovation, right? And we see this in that, the biggest technological advances and the biggest companies and stuff come out of already wealthy societies. There's a couple of reasons for that. It tends to be that there are higher education levels, there is more access to opportunity for sure. But it's also that like if you're an American, you swing for the fences, you're unlikely to die, right? You're unlikely to, go broke and be living on the street. However, this is significantly more likely in the United States than it is inside of more social leaning countries like, say, Northern Europe. And that's an interesting one because like in the United States, if you pile all of your resources into starting a new business or working on a particular problem and it fails, you could actually very easily be out on the street and not have access to medical and healthcare. And then if you are instead in, say, Denmark, right, you would never be unhoused and you'd always have access to medical this and that. Now, where is the line that is like you need that safety net but maybe not too much of it, right? Because in the United States there's a culture of being of really swinging for the fences, but there's also a higher risk of swinging for the fences, and I can't really square that circle.
Yeah, it's very, I mean, I think this comes down to like, socialism versus capitalism, right? It's like, I think there does need to be like a degree of like safety nets in terms of like healthcare and, being housed. And I think there's also an element of if you have a lot of people who have a very high degree of interest in making money, then you have a lot more gamblers and you have a lot more risk takers. Whereas, and people talk about this as access to capital. Is like, can you reasonably find, enough people to like give you money for an idea that, may or may not work out? I think there is a lot of value to that because one of the things, having worked a bit with startups, is the US, they're like quite happy for something to fail because like they're taking a bet and they know that there's like asymmetric upsides to these things that do work out. And as you said, there is like a Pareto front of like they want to, make at least just one bet that really like works out for them. I think in Europe there is like a conservativeness about taking risks, and whether that's just societal, as in going through wars and whatever the history is there. It is a factor, and I also in the UK at least is if you go broke, if your business doesn't work out, you can even get like a notch on your name, so you can't start a business if you go bankrupt, for instance. Whereas in the US they don't necessarily have those kind of things. So to fail at a business is like, oh, good job, man, like you'll get it next time. Whereas in some of these European countries it's kind of like a mark of shame, and that's more just like, I guess, culturally, like people getting used to having these big ideas. But Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think it's there needs to be. I think you need to be confident that you will be okay if you lose, because it's, you know, unavoidable that there is at least a risk that you will lose. But what I like to think about is that the more businesses you start, the higher your likelihood of
I mean,
reaching
that's
success.
just pure math, and it's also you learn from each failed
Yeah.
business.
Like most of the Silicon Valley like big names were like second or third time founders, and not
For
even
sure.
like not even success. Like if you founded a business, raised money, and it failed, you're still more likely to have a successful outcome the second business than someone
Yeah.
who's never started.
There's the story, and whether it's true or not is a intern is working on the production code base, and they accidentally drop the table, and it sends the entire company into panic. And once it's rectified, the board asks the boss, like, hey, so did you fire the intern? It's like, why would I fire the intern? That was a very expensive lesson to teach him.
Yeah, exactly. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think there's, yeah. I mean, it's a learning side, and if there's anything that's a takeaway, is like you might as well start a business now.
Hey,
I like
that's
like
exactly
have
it.
it fail fast, and then
Also, have it fail while
because-
you're young, you know,
yeah,
before
I
you
think
have
that's the
too
thing.
many financial responsibilities.
Exactly, and I think the risk, in fact, the risk these days with, you know, AI taking people's jobs and stuff, the risk is that you might get fired anyway, right? So there's almost like now a bit of a risk to not having agility as one of your key factors, and so having some sort of side hustle, although like not to get into hustle culture, but like having something on the side that's like something for you to run is not.
Be a volunteer
At all.
firefighter. Who knows? Maybe you'll
Exactly.
become a real firefighter later.
I mean, if it can make money, that adds to it, because you also then have
Yeah, for sure.
of your safety net. But it's something that people have to reckon with. But I do hopefully encourage people to start businesses if they can.
Yeah, so I think we'll
And
end
take
off
on
over
hard
there.
problems.
We'll end off over there with the whole, how do you eat an elephant? You eat it one bite at a time.
I wonder what elephant tastes like.